I gave them everything: love, loyalty, sacrifice, and they repaid me with betrayal and greed. Every moment of my life, I was the afterthought, the disposable one, while Olivia was their golden child. They mocked me, used me, discarded me, and when I finally revealed my success, they had the audacity to demand more. Not love, not an apology, just money. My own parents, my own sister, they never wanted me. Only what I could give them. And that truth burned. For the last 10 years, I lived a double life. To the world, and more importantly, to my adoptive family, I was Lynn Parker. A quiet, ordinary office worker struggling to get by in the city. My parents, Charles and Evelyn Parker, always reminded me how lucky I was that they took me in when no one else wanted me. My sister, Claire, made sure I knew I was second best, the afterthought to her shining existence, while they poured their money, time, and endless encouragement into her failed businesses and extravagant lifestyle. I was left to fend for myself. They saw me as nothing more than an obligation, someone to do the thankless tasks. To nod, to accept their scraps without complaint. But what they didn't know was that Lynn Parker was an illusion. In reality, I was Lynn Chen, founder and CEO of Chen Technologies, one of the most powerful companies in Silicon Valley. The modest apartment, the dull office job, the struggling paycheck, it was all a carefully crafted cover. I wanted to see how my family would treat me without knowing my true worth. They failed spectacularly, and soon, they would learn exactly who I really was. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. A day filled with love, celebration, and the promise of a future built on truth. I had waited 10 years for this moment. For the chance to finally reveal to my adoptive family who I really was. I had envisioned the way their faces would light up in shock. Their expressions shifting as they realized the quiet, insignificant girl they had dismissed was, in fact, the youngest self-made billionaire in the tech world. I was ready to let them see me for the first time, truly see me. But before I could even speak, my sister Claire stole the moment. As the minister asked if anyone objected, her voice rang through the grand ballroom. I object, she sneered, standing up in her designer gown. Her lips curled in smug satisfaction. The room fell into stunned silence. She's not even a real Parker, Claire continued, her voice dripping with venom. She's adopted. My parents took her in out of pity when she was abandoned. And now she thinks she's good enough to marry into a family like David's? A wave of gasps swept through the guests. My heart pounded, but not from embarrassment, from rage. I turned to my parents, hoping, praying, they would put a stop to this. But my mother simply nodded. My father stared at the floor. It's true, Mom said, as if this was the moment she had been waiting for. We've been too kind, letting her pretend she fits in. The weight of their betrayal crushed the air from my lungs. After years of sacrifice, after every moment I had tried to earn their love, this was how they truly felt? David reached for my hand, his grip tight with reassurance. But I wasn't going to let him fight this battle for me. I lifted my chin, took a deep breath, and let my voice carry through the room. You're right, I'm not family. I paused, letting the words sink in. And after today, I never will be. Then, with every ounce of dignity I had left, I turned and walked out of my own wedding. The morning after what should have been my wedding day, I sat in my real office, the top floor of Parker Innovations, staring at the morning headlines. My so-called family probably thought they had humiliated me in front of my guests. That they had finally put me in my place. But instead, the story had unfolded in a way they never expected. Tech Titan's wedding disaster. Family betrayal exposes billionaire heiress. I smirked as I read the article. They thought they had stripped me of my dignity. But all they had done was give the world the perfect opportunity to see the truth. For 10 years, I had let them believe I was a struggling office worker. Someone barely making ends meet in a cramped New York apartment. All the while, I had been quietly building an empire, a $50 billion empire to be exact. My assistant knocked on the door. Ma'am, Your guests have arrived. I smoothed my blazer and stood, adjusting the nameplate on my desk that read Lynn Parker, CEO, before signaling for security to let them in. When my parents and Claire stepped into the room, their eyes widened in disbelief. My mother's hands trembled as she took in the sleek modern office. The panoramic view of the city skyline behind me. The undeniable power radiating from my presence. You, my father's voice cracked. This is your office? I nodded, motioning for them to sit. Welcome to my world. Now, let's talk about everything you've stolen from me. I slid a thick folder across the desk, detailed financial records. Evidence of every time they had accepted anonymous gifts from me. Bank transfers funding Claire's failed businesses. Proof of the countless times they had belittled me while living off my generosity. Claire's face paled. This isn't possible. I folded my hands and smiled. Oh, but it is. And now that the truth is out, it's time for you to experience what it feels like to be nothing. The power shift was complete. They had spent years treating me like I was beneath them. Today, I reminded them exactly who I was. I sat back in my chair, watching as my so-called family crumbled under the weight of their own greed. They had spent years believing I was nothing. An afterthought, someone to be used and discarded. But I wasn't that fragile, naive girl anymore. I was Lynn Parker, the youngest self-made billionaire in the tech industry. And I had built everything they now feared, without them. Claire's hands shook as she flipped through the folder. Her usual smug confidence replaced by desperation. You were behind all of this, she whispered. The money, the businesses, everything? I tilted my head. Every single cent. Claire, every anonymous donor that saved your ridiculous business ventures. Every last-minute financial bailout mom and dad received when they ran out of money. That was me. I leaned forward, voice steel. And you still treated me like garbage. Dad clenched his fists, his voice shaking with forced authority. You think you're punishing us by exposing this? You'll regret this. Lynn, family is family. I let out a sharp laugh. Family? I repeated, my voice colder than ice. You kicked me out when I was 19. Stole the money meant for my education. And then had the nerve to try to ruin my wedding just because I dared to find happiness outside of your control. That isn't family, that's abuse. Mom's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But we raised you. No, I cut her off. You raised Claire. I was an obligation, a financial inconvenience, a shadow standing beside your real daughter. And yet, I was the one who made sure you never went broke. I was the one who silently held this family together. Claire stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the polished marble floor. You're doing this for revenge, she hissed. I smirked. No, I'm doing this for justice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one begging to be seen. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. The family's silent bank account. The cast-off charity case. I was the one in control. And as I watched the panic settle into their eyes, I knew one thing. They had underestimated me for the last time. I sat alone in my office, staring out at the towering skyline, the city lights flickering like tiny promises of the future. I was free. The weight of my past, my so-called family, their lies, their manipulations, it was all crumbling behind me. They had taken so much from me over the years. But I had built something stronger. Something they could never touch. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own life. I belonged to myself. The fallout had been swift and brutal. My parents, once revered in their social circles, were now outed as leeches who had squandered their wealth while secretly living off the daughter they disowned. Claire, the golden child, had lost every investor she ever had after they realized that the businesses propping her up weren't hers at all. They were funded by me. And now, that funding had been ripped away. The best part? I never had to lift a finger. The truth did all the work for me. News spread fast. People who once ignored me were suddenly eager to apologize. Desperate to rewrite history in their favor. Even extended relatives, ones who had never once asked about my well-being, began calling. acting as if they had always supported me. I ignored them all. But Claire? Claire wasn't one to go down without a fight. She stormed into my office that evening, looking disheveled for the first time in her perfectly curated life. "You think this makes you better than me?" she spat, slamming her hands on my desk. "Just because you have money. You think you're powerful?" I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head. "No, Claire," I said calmly. "I think I'm powerful because, despite everything you did, I still won." Her face twisted in fury. But she had nothing left. No schemes, no safety net, no parents to run to for help. She had spent her whole life treating me like a backup plan. Now, she was the one with nothing. And I was just getting started. The headlines hit like a thunderclap. Socialite Claire Parker exposed. Lavish lifestyle funded by disowned sister. I sat at my desk, sipping my morning coffee, relishing the poetic justice of it all. The same people who had once whispered about how I was lucky to have been taken in, how I should have been grateful, were now the ones questioning everything. It was finally happening. Claire had spent years living on stolen credit she never deserved. Her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, her failed businesses, all of it was built on my hard work, my silent funding, my patience. And now she was being dragged through the mud. I scrolled through the online comments. Wow, imagine leeching off your own sister and then treating her like dirt. This is the same Claire Parker who bragged about being a self-made entrepreneur? Karma finally came knocking. I smiled. Yes, it did. Claire, of course, wasn't handling it well. I imagined her pacing in her overpriced penthouse, phone in hand, trying to control the narrative, trying to control me. But this time, there was nothing she could do. No fake apologies, no crocodile tears, no lies to spin. And then, as if on cue, my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Parker," she said, voice laced with amusement. "Your sister is here. Should I let her in?" I took another slow sip of my coffee. Perfect. "Send her in," I said. The door flew open before my assistant could even step away. Claire stormed in, looking nothing like the picture-perfect influencer she pretended to be. Her hair was unkempt, her makeup smudged, her once arrogant confidence crumbling under the weight of reality. "How dare you," she hissed. I set my cup down and met her gaze with a smirk. "I didn't do anything, Claire," I said smoothly. "You did. You played yourself. You built your castle on lies. And now it's collapsing." For the first time in her life, she had nothing left to say. And the vindication felt better than I ever imagined. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words and years of resentment. Claire sat across from me in my office, her fingers gripping the edge of her designer bag like it was the last lifeline she had left. Her eyes, usually filled with smug superiority, were desperate now, darting between me and the door as if she was weighing her chances of escape. She had never been good at facing consequences. "You have to fix this," she finally said, voice trembling. "You can't just sit back and let them destroy me." I arched an eyebrow. "Destroy you?" The words tasted bitter on my tongue, the sheer audacity of them making me want to laugh. "You mean like you tried to destroy me? Like how you and Mom and Dad paraded me around as a charity case while secretly living off my hard work?" Claire's face crumpled for a moment before she composed herself. "It wasn't like that," she muttered. "We, Mom and Dad, thought you didn't need the money. You had your little tech thing going on. And you never asked for anything. We just assumed." "You assumed I'd keep letting you take from me," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You assumed I'd never notice. But I did. I always did. And I let it slide for years because I thought, deep down, I thought I still had a family. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd wake up one day and see me as more than just your endless supply of money." Her lip trembled. "Lynn, please." I stood up, smoothing down my blazer as I walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Everything I had built, I had done on my own. Without them. Claire, I said, turning back to her, for the first time in your life. You're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet. She inhaled sharply. You're really not going to help me? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, Claire, this time, you're on your own. For the first time in my life, I watched her crumble, and I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I sat in my office, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a testament to everything I had built, on my own. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than I was. I had spent years dimming my own light, letting my so-called family take from me while convincing myself that their approval mattered. But not anymore. The morning's headlines flashed across my screen. Another article detailing how my parents and Claire had been exposed for their lies. For their years of leeching off me while looking down on me. Their downfall was public, humiliating, and entirely self-inflicted. I had merely stepped aside and let the truth shine. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. My assistant peeked in. Your next appointment is here. I smiled, standing up. A new beginning. This meeting wasn't about cleaning up my family's mess or dealing with their manipulation. It was about me, about my next step. When I walked into the boardroom, my team stood, waiting. They weren't just employees, they were partners, investors, believers in my vision. For the first time, I wasn't just trying to survive or prove my worth. I was leading. All right, I said, setting my tablet on the table. Let's build something unforgettable. The energy in the room shifted, excitement sparking between us. This was what I had worked for. Not validation from people who never saw my worth, but power over my own destiny. That afternoon, I signed the final paperwork for my newest project, a venture completely separate from the empire my family had unknowingly benefited from. This one was mine alone. My name, my vision, my future. As I left the office that evening, I passed by a familiar cafe, the same one Claire used to drag me to so she could gossip about her latest failed ventures. This time, I walked in alone, ordered the most expensive coffee on the menu, and sat by the window. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to recognize me. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply free. The first time I saw my parents after their fall from grace. It was almost laughable. Almost. They weren't the untouchable, self-assured people they had once been. No expensive designer outfits. No smug superiority. Just 2 people who had burned every bridge and now stood before me with nowhere left to turn. I had been sitting at an upscale restaurant, reviewing proposals for my latest business expansion, when a hesitant shadow fell over my table. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Lynn. My mother's voice was softer than I had ever heard it, as if she wasn't sure she still had the right to say my name. I took my time setting down my tablet before meeting her gaze. She looked smaller somehow, the years of indulgence replaced with the weight of consequences. My father stood beside her, his usual overbearing presence reduced to silent desperation. You have a lot of nerve, I said, stirring my coffee. But then again, that's never been your problem, has it? My father cleared his throat, attempting some kind of authority. But I saw right through it. We've had a difficult time. Your mother and I. Lost everything? I finished for him. Yes, I know. It's amazing how quickly things crumble when they're built on lies and entitlement. My mother flinched. But I wasn't done. You spent years making sure I knew my place. You dismissed my ambitions, took my money without knowing it was mine. And when the truth came out, you turned on me like I was the problem. And now, what? You want my help? A second chance? A handout? Silence. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but cutting. I gave you everything without you even realizing it. And you threw me away. So now, you get exactly what you wanted. Nothing. Their expressions twisted, anger, regret, panic. It didn't matter. I stood, placed a few bills on the table for my untouched meal, and walked out without looking back. For the first time, I was truly free. and they were left with exactly what they deserved. The irony of it all was almost too perfect. Poetic justice in its purest form. My parents, the very people who had dismissed me, humiliated me, and treated me as less than, were now publicly exposed for the frauds they were. The headlines had already spread like wildfire. Disgraced socialites face bankruptcy after years of financial mismanagement. I hadn't lifted a single finger to make it happen. The truth did all the work for me. The same people who once adored them, the so-called friends who laughed at their jokes and indulged in their shallow conversations, had turned on them the second they lost their wealth. I sat in my office, sipping a perfectly brewed espresso, scrolling through the news, photos of my mother looking shaken and distressed, my father avoiding the cameras like a criminal. Their house, the one I had secretly been paying for all those years, was gone. Foreclosed. Sold to a young couple who had worked for their success rather than scheming their way into comfort. My parents were left with nothing but their pride, which was worth less than the auctioned-off furniture they used to gloat over. Then, there was Olivia, my dear sister, who had spent years basking in unearned luxury, was now experiencing the very struggle she had once mocked me for. I saw a social media post where she attempted to start an online business, only to be laughed off the internet when people dug up her past entitled rants about how hard work is for people without connections. I leaned back, smiling at the delicious irony. They had created their own downfall. Just as I was about to close my laptop, my assistant entered. "Miss Parker, you have a visitor," she said with an amused smirk. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. "They can wait," I said coolly, returning to my coffee. The same way they made me wait all those years for their love and approval. Now, they could learn what it truly felt like to be overlooked. I knew it was coming. They had lost everything, their wealth, their status, their fake friends, and now, they had nowhere left to turn. I sat in my office, overlooking the skyline, when my assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Miss Parker, your family is here to see you." I exhaled, staring at the reflection of myself in the glass window. The woman they discarded, the daughter they never valued, was now the only one left standing. How fitting. "Send them in," I said. When they walked through the door, it was almost laughable how much they had changed. Mom looked exhausted, the stress of losing everything visible in the tight lines of her face. Dad's suit, once tailored to perfection, hung a little looser, and Olivia, my oh-so-perfect sister, looked utterly defeated. No designer brands, no smug smirk, no superiority complex left to flaunt. "Lynn," Mom started, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. I raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Let me guess," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You need help." Silence. The desperation in their eyes was something I had seen before, but never directed at me. It was always me who had to beg for scraps of affection. Who had to prove my worth? Who had to fight for the smallest acknowledgement? "We made mistakes," Dad muttered. His voice lacked the authority it once carried. "We should have treated you better." Should have. I let the words settle, watching them shift uncomfortably. I stood up, walking around my desk slowly, deliberately. "You had years to treat me better. Years to love me. Years to see me as more than a burden. But you never did." "Lynn, please," Olivia whispered. I sighed, shaking my head. "You're only sorry because you lost everything." I picked up a folder from my desk and slid it toward them. Inside, a business proposal, a job, entry level, fair pay, no handouts. "If you want my help," I said, "you'll have to earn it." They stared at the folder, realization sinking in. This time, there were no shortcuts. I stood on stage, the spotlight warm on my skin, the audience in complete silence, hanging onto every word as I spoke. This wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration of triumph, of resilience, of the power of choosing yourself. As a child, I was told I wasn't enough. As a teenager, I was treated like an outsider in my own home. And as an adult, I was cast aside the moment I was no longer convenient to the people who should have loved me most. But today, I stand here not as the girl they abandoned, but as the woman who built her own empire. Applause erupted, but I wasn't finished. I spent years believing I had to prove myself to people who never saw my worth. Until one day, I realized, my worth wasn't something for them to define. It was mine to claim. I saw Olivia in the crowd, standing in the back, watching me with an unreadable expression. She had taken the job I offered. She had started over, humbled by the fall, learning what it meant to work for something instead of expecting it. Maybe she would never truly change, but at least now, she was learning. As the standing ovation swept through the room, I smiled. I had won, not through revenge, not through destruction, but through living my life, unapologetically and on my own terms. I had built something greater than I ever imagined, not just a company, but a life filled with people who truly valued me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need my family's approval. I had already given myself everything I deserved.